All right, hello and welcome to my video. As Mikey here for a few minutes, and I appreciate you being here. Of course, a like or subscription is always welcome. Any views, of course, are welcome. Right now, I'm trying to grow, but I just made this brief video to discuss or just give an idea of, basically give an idea of what I been experience and as someone who got out of high school, graduated from high school. Not like, that's a big deal per se, but I'm just saying once I got out of high school, I basically got into the job market. And it's not like I hadn't done any work before that. I had, basically a small home type of business, just doing like services for neighbors, cleaning up the yard, stuff like that. And I would make some reasonable part-time money doing that. But when I did graduate from high school, I was kind of thinking, oh, let me look for something a little bit more, but a little more potential, that kind of thing. So I had seen an ad in the paper, and basically what I'm doing here is just sharing my experience when I first started working for or with the Kirby vacuum cleaner company, which is a great company, right? And I highly endorse this company in many levels. But just want to give an experience, how it was for me when I first started selling these vacuum cleaners, essentially, and what it's like in my first couple of weeks selling these vacuum cleaners. And it's not like it's not intended to brag or anything like that. It's just basically to give my personal experience and maybe what someone who might be doing something like that, or maybe you've looked into that. Maybe you've seen an ad for this particular business, that particular company, or maybe another similar type of company, and you're thinking about getting into direct selling. And this is just the first 2 weeks of selling, first 2 full weeks. Now, it's not my first 2 weeks of attempting to sell. As a matter of fact, I did go for 3 weeks when I first started this job, if you will. It's more of an independent contractor type of deal, right? So I went for 3 weeks working this job at a location up in Washington State. And there it was, it was kind of a bigger distributorship that I was going to look at working with, right? And I was only 18 years old. I had no experience whatsoever in any like direct selling per se. Don't get me wrong, I had done stuff like I sold some raffle tickets, or I sold some burritos, something like that, when I was a kid. So, nothing like, getting into more direct selling, when I got do this job. For about 3 weeks, I was trying to do this job where we're going to demonstrate this vacuum cleaner in people's homes with the intention of making a sale, right? The intention of potentially making a sale. And very first demonstration I did make a sale, but didn't work out because, there was a credit check situation and that didn't work out. So I had to go repossess this vacuum cleaner the next day, right? So, you can imagine this is my first experience, my first demonstration. I'm only 18 years old. This kid, I go in to make the sale, and the idea is that I made, a few $100s on this sale, right? But then it didn't work out, and I had to go pick this, vacuum cleaner back up from their home. And, it kind of makes sense when you think about finance and the way, that it typically works. So anyway, that was a little bit disappointing, of course, but it wasn't like, I don't know, it didn't turn me off to the point where I would quit, right? So I kept going. So I kept trying to go do these demonstrations and, trying to learn from somebody else who would be like a trainer, etc. And going to do these demonstrations for various people, and you go into their homes and start, cleaning their home and everything like that. I'm talking about what I got, paid my first 2 weeks in selling these vacuum cleaners, right? Once I started selling them. So like I said, I went for this 3 weeks of doing these presentations, a few of them, I don't know exactly how many, maybe 30-ish or something like that, and didn't sell anything, right? Didn't make any sales, right? And so anyway, I eventually quit working for that distributorship because I wasn't making much money, and I was going to try to find some other kind of job or something like that. And I ended up moving to a different state, right? And then in that state, I essentially found another distributor that also worked with Kirby, was a Kirby distributor, right? So I decided to go ahead and try it again, right? This is a different situation. It was a smaller distributorship, and I saw the income potential. It wasn't like I thought, oh, there's no potential here. But, when I went to work for this distributor, I got a little bit more of a personal upfront, working directly with the main distributor himself. And I was thinking, well, he certainly knows how to do the business. So let me just learn from him what I can, right? So I went out and worked with him And actually, I apologize. Actually, it was a little bit longer that I was working for them the first time. So, I didn't really make any money during that time, right? For at least 3 weeks. Maybe it was a little bit longer, maybe a month or two. So, I didn't really make any money with them at that time, right? I did these demonstrations for 2 or 3 weeks. I didn't think I got any money actually from it, right? Most people would think, well, what do you do? You're insane, right? That's ridiculous. So, anyway, when I worked at this other distributorship, though, the second distributorship, in this other state, right, in the state of New Mexico, right, and then I was getting more of a personal, direct coaching from the distributor, and had a little time, and that's where I went 3 weeks and doing 10 of these demonstrations a week, where I go into the home, show them this vacuum cleaner and so forth, and clean up some of the room and shampoo a carpet and so forth, and so the 3 weeks there is what happened. The 3 weeks of doing like 10 demonstration a week, so about 30 demonstrations roughly, 30, 31 or something like that. So didn't actually make anything those 3 weeks, but the distributor was advancing me a few $100s a week, so he was floating me some money, if you will, an advance on potential future sales, right? So for 3 weeks, now I'm doing these 10 plus demonstrations a week, I'm getting some money, and so it's kind of keeping me going. But finally on the fourth week, right, this is the beginning of March, and this was in the 90s, right? So this is a while back, right, that I did this, right? I was starting this job as a Kirby rep, so it gives you an idea, like what I've, anyway, but the first, about the March, roughly even on the first of the month. I can't remember exactly the first of the month, but I think it was like right around there, right? The next demonstration, the first demonstration of that month, or I don't know exactly, but I made the first sale. I made my first sale, right? And I can't remember right offhand what that very first sale was, what type of, family it was, or whatever the situation was. But the thing was, I did make a few $100s. I made like $350, right? So, wow, okay, I could see some potential. I mean, that one actually stuck, right? And they kept they kept the vacuum cleaner. It didn't, the credit worked out and all that stuff. And it was just a really weird thing that happened, right? That all of a sudden, after a month or two up in this other state trying to do this, and then all of a sudden after 3 weeks of trying to do it and having a good amount of demonstrations and not a single sale, all of a sudden I sold this first one and made $350, and then I sold the next like 12 in a row, right? Like 12 in a row. All of a sudden, like everybody's buying this thing. It's weird. And most of those sales, I am actually making as much as $600 per sale, right? Like about at least half of them. The rest are somewhere in the $200 to $400 per sale. And over that first 2 weeks, I ended up selling like 13 of these vacuum cleaners, right? Somehow, just for whatever reasons, after all this, few weeks or months or whatever of trying to do it, all of a sudden this first 2 weeks, I sold of March 1996 or 5, I sold 13 of these units, right? 13 of these units, right? So, and I continued to sell a lot more after that, hundreds more personally. But just in that first 2 weeks, ultimately, Kirby distributor paid me over $4,200, right? Over $4,200 just in that first 2 weeks of selling in that month right there, right? So you can imagine what it was like all of a sudden, like, going from struggling to not having any clue how to sell these vacuum cleaners to all of a sudden, for whatever reason. And it wasn't necessarily that the distributor was with me on these particular demonstrations. It was just that I kept doing these demonstrations, right? And they would say that the new person get 1 out of 6 demonstrations would be a sale. And maybe that would be about right. 1 out of 6 complete demonstrations would work out to be a sale, right? But you could get better than that. You can get up to 1 out of 5, 1 out of 4, 1 out of 3, 1 out of 2. Some people could do even higher numbers than that, right? Higher than a 50% closing ratio, right? Obviously, you're walking into, every 2 homes you walk into, you're making a sale, and maybe making, whatever your average commission or earnings is, might be like $300 or whatever it is, right, on each one. And so that just gives you an idea. I'm sorry, I have a bird that's flying around. But so that was just to give you an idea of like the first 2 full weeks of actual selling, right? So it was thinking of it like an apprentice when I first got into this business, like and I'm not actually in it now. I'm not saying I'm doing that same business now. That's been a while back, and it's a really good business. I recommend anybody maybe go look at that business if you want to get back into something that's got potential, got opportunity. You could build a significant business with that business, but I had a lot of long story situation with the company in general. It wasn't like anything so bad about the company or anything like that, but I had interpersonal situations with people that I worked with and so forth. So that's the reason why that's the main reason why I don't necessarily work there anymore. But for someone who wants to learn key fundamental skills to sales. Now, don't get me wrong, there's different distributors that operate in different ways. Some people might consider their sales meetings to be cult-like or something like that. Hey, look, we have 30 minutes of sales training each morning before we go out into the field, right? That's the way a lot of distributors would treat it, right? So you go with the positive can-do attitude, right? The positive can-do attitude. You go out there, and in my case, right, when I was doing this, I was actually selling door-to-door cold calling, right? So in that particular first experience where I made within my first 2 weeks, made over $4,200, and I was getting paid every day. So I'm not claiming to be any big shot. Plenty of other people that probably did way better than me in many ways, right? Like just starting out or overall in the long run, etc. So I'm not claiming to be anybody special, but I'm just saying for someone who is looking to learn the skill of selling, right, and what the best practices are, I would say that was definitely a good experience for that, right? And also studying, reading books by professionals and stuff like that, right? That's also another thing I was trying to do at the time. Believe it or not, at 18 years old, I was reading a book by Zig Ziglar, right, and a few other books, right, that were helping me to learn what I was trying to do better. And I learned really overall, it wasn't even necessarily about selling, like aggressive selling. It was about a law of averages, right? Like, for example, that first 3 weeks plus, maybe up to 2 or 3 months total that I didn't sell anything, overall, what it really was doing was averaging out. All of a sudden, I sold 13 in a row, right? And I went to sell hundreds more after that, up to, maybe 500 or more personal sales, right? So definitely, that gave me the initial impetus to go out there and say, hey, wait a minute, I can really just hustle a little bit. Go out there, just knock on doors, and people will let me in to sell, to clean their carpet. People want to see it in many cases, and there's a lot of negatives with people that won't let me show it to them, and that's fine, no problem, no big deal, right? But if they do, I have a good 30%, maybe even up to a 50% plus chance that they are going to purchase the item, in that case, the Kirby, right? And which I believe was the best machine on the market, right? And I still only personally would use that for my own cleaning, generally speaking, right? So I highly recommend having one, even though they can be expensive in some respect. But in my opinion, it's worth it to have the higher quality. Sometimes you have to spend the extra money to have the higher quality, right? So depends on how you go about it. If you're looking at it from the purchasing standpoint or something like that, maybe a lot of people wouldn't necessarily say, "Oh, I'd invest that much money in a vacuum cleaner." Well, it's more than just a vacuum cleaner, right? It's got a bunch of stuff to it. So I definitely believed in the product. I felt like it give you a reasonable bang for the buck. And if you want the best, it's the only choice in my opinion, right? So I was able to go in there just confidently and have fun with people and not necessarily even say so much about like selling per se, right? So I got better at that. And that was from practice, right? Practice and just making friends, right? And make friends in that kind of business. If you go out there and talk to a lot of people, be friendly, be optimistic, get excited, right? Don't put pressure on people, right? At the same time, be honest and upfront about your intentions. I'm trying to be number one. I'm trying to, I'm really out here. Yeah. Well, sort of, I'd love to earn your business if I could, of course, or, do some test closing stuff that I did to help me to eventually get more sales overall in the long run. But, overall, you think about it, wait a minute, every home here in this area here, bottom line, all these homeowners, they need a reasonable piece of equipment. They need something that's making it easier or more capable for them to clean stuff, that they otherwise maybe. So, thinking about it from that perspective, when I'm going to get into a neighborhood, thinking about, fulfilling a need in the marketplace, showing them what's failing right now and how we could maybe make it better, stuff like that, right? Not criticizing people. This is just some of the skills that would go into the idea, the mindset that I would use to get more sales, right? And so, but I'm just saying, like you said, after that, certainly many people would open up distributorships and you could make, a lot more than that, right? But I'm just giving you an idea, even as a newcomer, someone who's, didn't have any experience at the time, what it's possible if you have an optimistic mindset, a can-do attitude, if you go out there and actually try, right? There is opportunity out there, even in the tough economy. There's opportunities, there is needs, there's demand, there's still supply and demand. And if you find a good product or service, you can certainly still prosper, right? And that can help you to be more successful for your family, your community, whatever it is you're trying to achieve, right? Maybe it's just for yourself. But bottom line, I just wanted to give you my experience, like you said. And, maybe you have an similar experience with another similar type of business where you felt like you didn't have any clue what you were doing, but then all of a sudden went on to achieve success in some level, right? Maybe drop me a line below. Of course, I appreciate comments, or any feedback. And in the meantime, maybe you'll see another video here that might be looking interesting at the end of this video. If you do, I encourage you checking it out. If not, maybe we'll see you the next time in another video. Thank you for listening. I hope you have a great day in the meantime.